Thank you so much. What an honor and a thrill it is to be here, closing out the failure week. Let's hope that doesn't provide an omen. So I have been studying failure, truly, for, I should say, more than 30 years, and I've come to a conclusion. Wait for it. Failure is a part of life. Okay. And it's not as simple as it may first appear. In fact, our intuition about failure fails us. It's true, it's true. So where should we begin? Let's begin with science. DNA, shown on this slide. Most of us, in fact, I imagine all of you, are familiar with the concept of DNA, and probably very few of you manipulate these tiny chemicals to produce life-saving therapeutics or game-changing innovations. But that is what Professor Jennifer Heemstra does for a living. Now, Jen is the first woman to get tenure in chemistry at Emory University. She is a leader in her field. She is undeniably a successful scientist. So does that mean that everything in her lab goes well every day? No. In fact, Jen estimates that 90% of the experiments that she and her team run end in failure, right? And so what Jen is doing, she's not alone. Her lab is not alone. When she's epitomizing what I'll call the right kind of wrong. When a thoughtful hypothesis is not supported by the data in the lab, that is the right kind of wrong. As Jen puts it, failure is a part of science. And I'll add, it's a part of progress in every field. So, Jen says as she understands that young people, especially high achievers like the ones that are working with her, need to have failure destigmatized. So she says things like, we're going to fail all day. She told me that 9 times out of 10, i.e. 90% failure rate, people are beating themselves up unnecessarily, right? So that's a lot of pain. And she understands the role of science, why it is in fact essential. She's not alone in that. Another person who gets the right kind of wrong is David Kelly, a Stanford engineering professor and co-founder of IDEO, arguably the world's most celebrated innovation consultancy, with offices around the world and household name corporate clients. IDEO helps them innovate. Now, David is known to walk around the firm in Palo Alto and say to the teams working away on client projects, fail often to succeed sooner. So he too understands the absolutely critical role of failure in success if you want to innovate. Now, you might be thinking, this is obvious, and you'd be right. So why does David Kelly and Jen Heemstra waste his breath? Because he knows, again, these high achievers that he has hired at IDEO don't like to fail, right? So here in a nutshell is the problem with the failure craze. We know deep down failure is bad, right? We learned this in elementary school at some point. You couldn't escape it. We figured out that you want to get the answer right, not wrong. We want to look good, not bad. We want to succeed, not fail. And the organizations where we work, that's kind of where most of my research happens, make it worse, right? Make this instinctive aversion to failure that we have, make it worse. By the way, we spontaneously have an negative emotional reaction to our own failures. We're less concerned about other people's failures, right? Just not so much the case. So our organizations make it worse. Let me give you an example. Not so long ago, I was speaking with some executives at a large financial services company, and they said, they knew my work. They said this fail fast stuff, That's great, they said, in good times. But they said now, in a turbulent environment that we now face, they said now failure is off limits. It's tempting in difficult times to double down on demands for excellence. And I sure empathized. But here's the problem. In turbulent times, guess what? Failure is more likely than ever. Moreover, in turbulent times, innovation is more needed than ever. So what these executives needed to understand, and the rest of us need to understand, is yes, there are failures that we should work hard to avoid, and there are failures that we must learn to welcome. Right? We need that ability to discern, and it starts here. I'm going to say something very obvious now. Context matters. So there are different environments where people work. There are what I call consistent contexts where uncertainty is very, very low. We know exactly, one of those little Camrys is going to come off the line every 57 seconds. You can count on it. There are variable contexts where we have mature knowledge about cause and effect, and there's uncertainty, and there's a high need of customization. So a little more complex, a little more uncertain, like an operating room. And then there are what I'll call novel contexts. Jennifer Heemstra's lab, IDEO, where we literally don't know how to get the result we want yet, okay? I know this is obvious, but guess what? As we move to the right on this spectrum, uncertainty goes up. Guess what else goes up? Like it or not, right? Failure goes up. We have to learn to live with that, or just stay away from the novel, but I don't think we have that luxury. And we can't stay away from the variable. It's with us. It's everywhere. So the important thing here, it's not just context, it's also that there are different kinds of failure, which those executives didn't seem to understand. And I want to offer a framework to you and see if it helps. But I'm going to start with the simplest of definitions, in part because of the theme of this week, which is learning from our mistakes. I want to be very clear that I don't think mistakes and failure are the same thing. They're highly related, right? But let's get some basic definitions. Failure, I know this is pretty basic, but failure is an undesired result. Mistake is an unintended deviation from existing knowledge, from pre-specified standards, procedures, rules, or policies. There is no such thing as an intentional mistake. That's sabotage. Okay, so we got to be very clear about that. Now, the other thing I should add is that we humans do make mistakes. There's really no escaping it. However, at our best, we can, especially working together, we can catch and correct many of them, maybe even all of them, and prevent many, not all, but many failures. So this is why I think the distinction is so important, because a mistake happens in the process, and the failure is the result. And as I said before, there are failures that we should work hard to prevent. So here's my taxonomy. 3 archetypes, 3 types of failure: basic, complex, and intelligent. A basic failure has a single cause, usually human error, that leads to this undesired outcome. A complex failure is multi-causal, as the name implies, where a handful of small deviations from best practice, perhaps, line up in just the wrong way, often with a modicum of bad luck and exogenous factors, perhaps outside your control, line up to create a failure. Importantly, often taking out any one of those factors that contributed could prevent the complex failure. And even more importantly, any one of those factors on its own would not produce the failure, then it's pretty basic. Right? And then finally, intelligent failures are the undesired result. Just ask Jen Heemstra, she'd rather be right than wrong. The undesired result of thoughtful forays into new territory. That's the right kind of wrong. We draw a line in the sand. Now, I want to give you a couple of examples of each type to bring the ideas home. So here's one of my favorites. Those poor employees. Back in 2020, August 11th, a Citibank employee essentially checked the wrong box in an online form and accidentally transferred $900 million to a group of lenders. I use this example just to make the point that basic doesn't mean small, okay? Really doesn't. Size has nothing to do with this. Okay, it's just basic. Now, later, a very controversial judge's ruling, called a finder's keeper's ruling, precluded Citibank from getting that money back. So, a basic failure. Now, I know, it's funny in a way. Here's a more tragic one. Also, basic does not equal small. But back in 1982, on January 13th, it was a cold, brutally cold, icy day when Air Florida Flight 90 took off from National Airport in Washington, D.C., and a few minutes later crashed into an ice-covered Potomac River, killing 78 souls. That accident, really a devastating accident, immediately, as you know, there will be an investigation, and the black box recording contained the simple human error responsible for this complex failure. I put it up here. I won't read it. I imagine as you see it, if you can read it from where you're sitting, you will immediately spot the error, right? Anti-ice off, right? If there was ever a day where the anti-ice should have been on, it was that day. Now, we wonder, how could that happen? And my best guess, I wasn't there, my best guess is Air Florida. Right? This is a group of pilots who are used to warm weather. That anti-ice thing, that's just rote. They require us to say this, that's just rote. Now, not to get too deeply into it, because one of the things I describe in the book, I spend a lot of time in the book describing what we know about how to prevent preventable failures. Checklists are one of the tools. However, they have to be used while awake, right? And I know, it's funny, but it's true, right? Mindfulness, vigilance, those will be themes running through this work. Now, let's move on to complex failures. I open the chapter on complex failures with the Torrey Canyon. How many of you had heard of the Torrey Canyon oil spill from 1967? Very few, but some. So it happened in March of 1967. It hit this ship, hit the reef off the Isle of Scilly at full speed, and the bottom was torn out. 14 cargo tanks were ripped open, triggering this devastating spill of more than 13 million gallons, to this day, Britain's largest oil spill. Now, this is, in fact, a classic complex failure. Why? I mean, it seems like just you shouldn't drive into a reef, but let me tell you what actually happened, right? So it's quintessential, right? There was time pressure. Well, they're all under time pressure all the time, but in this case, the ship would not see another favorable tide, high enough tide to get into the harbor where they were heading for another week. So they very much wanted to make it. They happened to be missing a copy of the Standard Maritime Manual. Again, none of these things on their own would lead to this bad outcome. The captain stayed up late, don't we all? Ocean currents pushed the ship slightly off course overnight. First officer changed course without permission. 2 lobster boats appeared suddenly out of the fog, and there was a small, unimportant, mechanical problem with the steering wheel that made quick recovery difficult. and the rest is history. As Captain Rigliotti said in the hearing, many little things added up to one big disaster. That's the very definition of a complex failure. Unfortunately, this particular failure was the end of his career. He was assigned full blame for this outcome, an assignment that apparently saved the shipping company $17 million. For more detail, you can read more about it in the book. A complex failure that I spent years studying happened at NASA. I've studied both of their shuttle failures, but I want to talk to you about the Columbia accident in 2003. On February 1st, 2003, and this is an image of that launch, and it looked to all the world, and indeed to all of the executives at NASA, like a picture-perfect launch on January 16th, 2003. 2 weeks later, unfortunately, Columbia re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and fully combusted, killing the 7 astronauts and the craft. Now, this is a tough one for me to talk about because I know too much, and I could literally spend the rest of our time together describing all of the smaller and larger factors. Probably one of the most important, at least to me, was a total lack of what I call psychological safety that made it very difficult for the engineer who did wonder. Rodney Rocha watched post-launch video the day right after the launch and saw a speck, or just a funny speck that he didn't like the looks of, one of those gut things. And he tried to speak up to his boss. His boss dismissed it. Foam strikes happen all the time. The shuttle program had a history of foam strikes. They had concluded, erroneously, that they were a nuisance, but no more. They led to maintenance, but never to catastrophic outcomes. The combination of the climate at NASA, again, the time pressure, I could go on and I could count to more than 8, coming together, and in this case, over years, over the 25 years or so of the program. So complex failures have these attributes. They tend to, Boeing 737 MAX crises, they tend to unfold over time. They have a history and a handful of contributing factors that come together in just the wrong way in a situation where you've gotten away with it for years, perhaps. And they often are preceded by subtle warning signs. I promise you that when those warning signs are loud and clear, people respond. But when they're more subtle, a speck on a video, it is easy cognitively and organizationally to downplay them, letting the failure fly through. Now, the only silver lining, because complex failures are here to stay, and complex failures are on the rise because of the complexity of our systems. Our interdependence has never been greater. The silver lining, though, is the last bullet point here. Complex failures, by their nature, present multiple opportunities for prevention. But we have to notice them. Right? And we have to be listening and inviting voice. And we need people to be speaking up early and often. So now we get to transfer over to the other side, right? The good kind, the intelligent failures. So there's an old story. I don't even know if it's true, but it involves a lab assistant of someone you know well, Thomas Edison, coming to the famous inventor and saying, with empathy, "Gosh, it must be so hard for you with all those failures." To which Edison retorted, looking at the young man, "Failures?" He says, "I haven't failed. I have found 10,000 ways that don't work." Right? So you see, Edison understood the right kind of wrong. Right? And there's a cheerfulness, about great inventors, great scientists. They don't like failure, but they get it. It is on the path to where they're going. If they want breakthrough discovery, invention, they're going to have to learn to live with it. So they train themselves to live with it. Now, in companies, in modern companies where I do most of my research, where this lives, of course, is in the R&D departments. of organizations. So another example that I do share in the book of a complex failure is Alimta. In 2013, Lilly had a brand new chemotherapy drug that they believed was highly promising for targeting and curing a certain cancer. So they did what you must do before releasing it to the market. You have clinical trials. Alimta did terribly well in the first part of the clinical trials. They were able to prove that it was safe. It did no harm. And now we move on to the next clinical trial, which is the trial whose job it is to prove that it actually works against the cancer. And here, Lilly failed. Alimta, in the clinical trials, was unable to show any efficacy, any improvement in the patient population with the disease. So this is, I know, it's not happy. It's not a happy story, but it is the right kind of wrong, right? It's in new territory. The clinical trial is just as big as it needed to be, no more, right? And it's disappointing. And I'm going to come back to this story later. So here are the rules, if you will. If you want to call a failure intelligent, you can't just call it intelligent. It must pass 4 tests, 4.5. Okay, the first test is this genuinely new territory? Or could I just look up the answer on the internet? Right? Could I just get a recipe from a friend? Could I ask for help if I don't know what to do? Right? Or criterion 1. Number 2, do you sense a credible opportunity to move toward a valued goal? Right? Or are you just messing about with resources? And number 3, have you done your homework? Right? Is there good reason to believe this might work? Certainly, Lilly had passed all 3 tests. And finally, no bigger than necessary. Right? So a clinical trial is deliberately designed to have just enough patients to show statistical power to see whether it works or not. And so Lilly passes those tests. And then the half criterion, maybe you might think it's a whole criterion, is you take the time to learn from it. What did this failure tell me? So again, R&D departments are where this happens all the time. So let me share another case study from my field research in a company I shall call Telco. I won't tell you their real name. You'll see why soon. But they were one of the baby bells once spun off. And this was in very late 1999, where most of us were still doing dial-up internet, right? And so it was slow, it wasn't ideal, and customers were clamoring for higher speed. Telco was all over it. So they had, by the way, they were very, very good. They had 90+% customer satisfaction scores. They've got this nice R&D department developing this new tech for high-speed internet access. They do, as one does in R&D, a pilot. It is small. It is exquisitely well-staffed. It takes place in a nearby suburb. It goes so well that the senior executives say yes to the big launch. We're going to now launch in the whole city. How do you think it went? This is a talk. This is a talk about failure. So in a word, it was a fiasco. Right? Now, innovation, I said David Kelly said it best. Right? You're supposed to have failures in innovation. Not so big. Let me tell you how big. Right? So wait, let me go back a sec. What I want to say about just a couple of data points. 15,000 orders late at any given time. Employee morale plummeted. Customer satisfaction scores fell into the low teens, right? So big jump from the 90s. And finally, it turns out that marketing had been in the midst of a branding campaign. So not good. None of this was good. So here's my scorecard, if you will. New territory? Yes. Right? Opportunity driven? Yes. So far, so good, right? Good reason to believe this technology can work? Absolutely. It's beautiful in the pilot. As small as possible? Oops. Right? Not the case. Okay, so why didn't the pilot save the company from experiencing a fiasco? You probably guessed it already. And here's how I'll put it. Because the pilot was a success, right? So the pilot, I'm going to say, failed by succeeding. It should have succeeded by failing. Does that make any sense? Yes, right? So here's 4 diagnostic questions that you can ask of any pilot in an innovation context. Right? Number 1, is it being tested under representative or typical circumstances, or is it rigged to succeed? Is the goal to learn or to prove to higher-ups how great is my baby? Right? And is it clear that compensation or performance reviews of any kind are not based on a successful pilot? What should they be based on, if anything? Possibly a successful launch. Very different incentive, right? So the incentives are wrong, if you will, in many organizations. And were explicit changes made? If not, you probably didn't learn anything. I wouldn't share this story with you if it weren't that it were typical. I've seen it many times. And it is a story of incentives, and we can go into that if you wish. But the new tech launch was not the right kind of wrong. So I put it this way. You know, again, if the third question here was good reason to believe it can work, yes. Good reason to believe it can work at scale? Maybe not. Right? We haven't done that yet, and certainly not as small as possible. So good pilots, a good pilot would be one where we experience lots of small, not really even visible to our customers, or at least not to most of them, failures behind closed doors. That's the kind of failure that David Kelly is talking about. Fail fast, fail often. Don't deliver bad work to our clients. Do it over here, behind closed doors. Get it right, and then we deliver. Another story. Ray Dalio, a 1975 alumnus of Harvard Business School, where I teach, he is armed with enviable energy and brains, and the investment firm he founded back in '76, Bridgewater Associates, had been doing extraordinarily well for about 7 years, so well, in fact, that Dalia was often asked to speak on nightly business news programs. He was, in fact, especially proud of his ability to predict long-term results. So in 1982, because of a number of economic indicators that Dalia had been following, he predicted that the U.S. economy was about to go into a major recession. He was well aware that this was a controversial prediction, which is why he was enthusiastic about it, because he thought he'd make a boatload of money. And now, in 1982, we find Dalia unable to pay his family's bills. He's lost everything. He's lost the firm, he's lost his employees, he has to borrow money from his dad to pay his rent. Right kind of wrong? I don't think so. Right? New territory. The future of the economy is always new territory. Opportunity-driven, yes, he wanted to make a lot of money. Good reason to believe it could work? Absolutely. Nobody was a better student of the economy than Dalia. As small as possible? No. Right? Missed it. And so, to his credit, Dalia says that failure, in retrospect, he says, was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It gave me the humility I needed to balance my aggressiveness and shift my mindset from thinking I'm right to asking myself, now check this out. This is the smallest shift in the history of mindset shifts. Shift from thinking I'm right to asking myself, how do I know I'm right? But you see, it unlocks it, right? It unlocks the curiosity you need to prevent that massive failure. To just stop, as soon as you entertained that there might be more to it, then you're getting somewhere. Or at a much, much smaller scale, Nikki Mecklin, a PhD candidate in New Zealand, sent me this beautiful image. She wrote with this photo, she said, she calls it her Amy is Right photo. She says she was taking a 6-week evening course on clay, on learning how to throw clay on a wheel. And she said, I'd done 5 or 6 beautiful pieces. And then this one. She said, I got a bit cocky. I tried to make the walls really lovely and thin. It was looking great until thunk. My hand slipped and punched the side of the bowl as it was in its final stages on the wheel. Within seconds, something beautiful had turned into a disaster. My clay teacher laughed and said, right, into the bin it goes. But I saved it. I decided I rather liked its ridiculously ugly shape. I would dispute that, by the way. I'm a perfectionist, and it bugged me. It bugged me that this bowl failed at the last turn. But by keeping it, I put it on my desk as a reminder that it's okay to fail. There can still be beauty in imperfection, and now I have a vessel to keep my river stones in. So, Nikki, this is an intelligent failure, right? Yes, 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 yes. So what's it all about? It's all about knowing, keep it deep down, right? Taking the intelligence, truly, intellectually and emotionally, the intelligence of intelligence failure to heart. Take it to heart. Recognizing that in new territory, the only way to make progress is through trial and failure. Notice I don't say trial and error. It's not error. Right? Failures in new territory are not errors. The only way to make progress in new territory is through trial and failure. Now, this means, and it's important to take this to heart too, intelligent failures of the three types, they are the only type that are not theoretically preventable. They can't be prevented. However, they can be avoided. Am I contradicting myself? No, no. How do we avoid them? Just play not to lose. Stay safe, right? Don't try to make the walls of the bowl thinner or more elegant or more beautiful. Now, what I have found in my teaching over the years is that it's hard for especially adults, and especially high-achieving adults, to kind of incorporate this logic into their emotional state. So what I do with my students is I often put them through a team exercise that's intended to give them an experiential feel for this. It's called the electric maze. Have any of you ever seen, participated in, heard of the electric maze? It's shown here. No, I don't see. Oh, one or two, a couple, great. So you know what I'm talking about. So it's this grid. It's a 9-foot by 6-foot grid, and it's a funny exercise. You got to get the whole team. Here's what's funny about it. Some of those squares emit an annoying beep when you step on them. Some of them are blissfully quiet, right? And I tell the team, you must find the path of contiguous, non-beeping squares. Your team must find that, and you have a time limit, 20 minutes. And I won't go into all of the details that you know well, but that's the gist of it. Now, I'll show you, just so you get a better feel for it, I'll show you the pattern, sort of the answer key, if you will, and then I have to kill you. But here it is, right? So this is, you can see there's some dead ends. It's a little tricky, but all those X's are squares that beep when you step on them, and all those Y's are nice, quiet squares. So what we see in the photo here is one of my students in what I call the stork position. Right? There's where she is, she's on the front line. No one in the team has been there yet, and she's hesitating. Right? And I told you there was a time limit. Right? So time is money here. They've got to step, they've got to get the data, or they'll never succeed. And most of my teams fail. So we debrief. That's what it's all about. And I say, when you were on the front lines, and everybody spent some time on the front lines, right, because they rotate through. I said, when you were in that position, on the maze, on the front lines, where no one had ever stepped before, what's going through your mind? And what do you think they say? I didn't want to make a mistake. It's a beep going forward. It is not a mistake. Right? There is literally no way from looking or measuring or anything else to know where those beeps are. The only way, step on them. The other thing they will sometimes say is, I didn't want to let the team down. And guess how the team responds, by the way, when there is a beep? They groan. How do they respond when it's quiet? They applaud. How should they respond when you get a beep? Same applause, right? It's all data. It's not bad or good, it's data. So I bring this up to you and to them to say, have fun experimenting when the stakes are low. And I do this not just to illustrate this point, but because R&D teams, many of whom will be led by these students, have those same emotional reactions, right? They want to succeed, not fail. And so, you know, it's hard for them. But a beep going forward, yes, 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 right? So there's some intuition that we have to develop here. And I like to capture it basically, you know, the more preventable a failure is, the more uncertainty there is, the less preventability there is. It's just a fact. And on the maze, it's a highly uncertain task. No way to make progress without stepping on it. So this is all bringing us to this. We must rethink our mental models about what it means to be excellent in an uncertain world. When those senior executives at that financial services company were telling me that failure was off limits, they were not thinking properly about reality today. So here's what I think excellence looks like today. Doing our very best, vigilance, checklists to prevent basic failures. Anticipating the inevitability of and the opportunity to prevent and mitigate complex failures. And welcoming, promoting, celebrating, welcoming the intelligent failures through which we make progress. And doing all three of these things means not being blind to the reality of error, but being ever mindful of the reality of error. It's like error awareness all the way through any project, any process, so that you're willing to speak up when something strikes you the wrong way, so that you're willing to experiment, take smart risks. So I call that environment, that belief, I call that psychological safety. And let me define it for you, because it's been getting a lot of play recently, and some of the definitions are quite wrong. I'll show you what I mean. So psychological safety is a belief that my context is safe for taking interpersonal risks like speaking up with an idea, a question, a concern, a failure. Not that it's easy, I don't think it ever is, but that you know and expect it to be welcome around here. Your colleagues, your teammates will say thank you. Right? So psychological safety is not about being nice. Not that I'm a fan of being mean, but it's not about being nice. It's not about being comfortable. It's not job security. And it's certainly not lowering standards. A leader I interviewed not so long ago, Ben Berman, captain at United Airlines, understands this well. He told me that every time he has a new cockpit crew, that's roughly every week, he starts the briefing with the following. He says to them, I have never flown a perfect flight. And it won't happen today either. I need to hear from you. He's creating psychological safety. He's saying, speak up. Even if you're just not even remotely sure whether that's a mistake, I need to hear from you. Now, Ben, Harvard grad, he did admit to me in the interview that it really bugs him that he's never flown a perfect flight. Right? That's what I'm talking about. So let me ask you, in the various roles you play in your families, in your organizations, how often are you hearing green versus red? Agreement versus dissent, good news versus bad, all's well versus I need help, success versus failure. Because if you're hearing a lot of green in our volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, I guarantee that you will have had a better week. I also guarantee you may not be getting the full story. And that's what those executives didn't understand, that by declaring either explicitly or implicitly failure off limits, the main thing they accomplished was that they just wouldn't hear about it. They wouldn't hear the truth, and that is dangerous. So rethinking excellence for an uncertain world. I saw this recently on the internet. All those darts not hitting the bullseye, that's not failure. The darts staying up on the wall and never being tried is failure. Right? Play to win, right? Not playing not to lose. Someone who's stood on this very stage understands this, Eleanor Roosevelt, when she says, do one thing every day that scares you. Make a new friend, right? Ask for help. That's a scary one. Now, if you are in a position of managing a team or an organization or even a family, what can you do to help people change their attitudes about intelligent failure. And to me, it's really pretty simple. It's three things. It's sort of the stage, setting the stage with ambition, right? Playing to win, with a aspirational purpose that you and they will be clear can only happen if we're willing to step on beeps going forward, right? That can only happen through experimentation, and create space for experimentation, and create knowledge in everybody's minds about the difference between the preventable and the intelligent failures, and then finally respond in a way that reinforces these attitudes. What does excellence look like? Reward speaking up. Thank you so much for that clear line of sight is something that you might say. Should you go so far as to have failure parties? You've probably heard about these, right? Companies are out there having failure parties. I mean, really. Good idea or bad? I'm actually going to, despite the laughter, say I think it's actually a pretty good idea. But make sure they're intelligent. So I'm going back to Olympta now. Right? And indeed, the chief scientific officer at Lilly, after this disappointing clinical trial, held a failure party. Why do that? 3 reasons. It rewards and celebrates the hard work that went into this failure. By the way, if you have a party, guess what happens? People show up. That's good, right? Because then they learn about it and they are at less risk for repeating the failure a second time in your own company. An intelligent failure in your organization the second time around is no longer intelligent, right? Not new territory anymore. So make sure the word spreads. And thirdly, interestingly, it turns out this can help people. There's a point in any project where you begin to realize the writing is on the wall. This one isn't going to win, right? And then fast forward 2 weeks, 2 months, I don't know. Now we tell someone about it. Can we tighten that window? That's money in the bank, right? So helping people, these little rituals, they seem silly, but they actually help people be more honest. They become a part of the culture. So here's the addendum of this Olympta story. The scientists leading the trial looked closely at the data, as one would, to try to figure out what happened. Why did the drug not show efficacy for our sick patients? Turned out that many of the patients in the trial did very well indeed. Real total remission in their cancer. But others didn't. Okay, is there anything we can say about who did well and who didn't? It turns out yes. Those who did not do well had a folic acid deficiency. That's a B vitamin. Easy, right? So all they had to do was remake Olympta with the B vitamin put into the mix, and it turned into a multi-billion-dollar drug. More importantly, saved many, many lives. So I can't promise you that analyzing intelligent failures will always produce a success as a result. But I can tell you that not analyzing them will never produce a success as a result. Right? So it's pretty straightforward. Now, there are cultures, national and corporate, where a failure party is just a bridge too far. You know what I'm talking about. So I had the good fortune to meet Jake Breeden, who at the time was Chief Learning Officer at Takeda Pharmaceutical, Japanese origin. And he said, it's just not a sale I can make. Nobody wants to have a failure party. So he said, this is what I do instead. He says, I celebrate the pivot. Right? Now, this might seem to you like just words. But he says, instead of we made a plan and it failed and here's the moral of the story, he says it's a narrative about change. We made a plan, things didn't go as planned, so we pivoted. Okay? And I think it's more than language, right? Although language matters, believe me. I have whole lesson plans around language mattering. But his reframe is really saying, it's focusing on, he says, where the story goes next. It brings suspense rather than shame. Now, I don't think there's shame in any intelligent failure, but he knew his audience, right? So he says when they celebrate the pivot rather than having a failure party, he says, here's what we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate the fact that our signals are so finely tuned that we can stop this. before we hurt anyone seriously. We're going to celebrate the fact that we've got so many other things in the pipeline, all our eggs aren't in one basket, and we're going to celebrate the fact that we're sharing this in an open way, and we're going to celebrate that we remain committed to this therapeutic area. Right? So all sorts of ways to celebrate intelligent failure. Now, for the rest of us, who aren't leading major innovation projects at pharmaceutical companies and elsewhere, where can we go from here? I take some insight and wisdom from 19th century novelist Louisa May Alcott, who says, "I am not afraid of storms, because I'm learning how to sail my ship." Well, for all of us, the future is quite simply uncertain and a little terrifying at times. It is clearly uncertain terrain. And uncertain terrain requires us to be vigilant and experimental in equal measure. We must do that. And I believe we can learn to thrive and accept intelligent failure gracefully. We can learn to thrive as fallible human beings. We're all fallible human beings, none of us exempt from that category, and make progress in this uncertain world. And I'll add something to Alcott by saying, I think we can learn to sail our ship, to navigate the storms, but today it really is a team sport. Right? We must learn to sail our ship, our spaceship Earth, together to make progress and do amazing things together. Now, I can't wait to see what questions you have.